Hi everyone, welcome. I'm Laura Jones, and in this session we're going to be speaking with elite runner and coach Sandi Nypaver. Coach Sandi is one of the co-founders of Sage Running, and she has won or been on the podium of a number of races ranging from 5k road races right up to 100-mile trail races. Sandi runs for Rabbit, Topo Athletic and Unived, and she lives in Boulder, Colorado. Sandi, thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Oh, thank you. So perhaps before we start, with more technical questions, perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about your background and how your running journey started.
Try to make this short. Basically, I've loved running my entire life. I've always ran since I can remember, but I never was actually on a team because I was too scared to join a team, to be honest. So I always just did it for training for other sports. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, which is definitely like a team sports town, and so that was a big focus, and like just seeing how people are running was kind of weird, and so like I did it like just because I love doing it. And then when I was in college, I was actually playing college basketball, but in the midst of college, I got this amazing opportunity from an organization called Impossible to Possible, and basically they let me go on a trip with all these amazing ultra runners to the Shape Pass, which is in northern Canada, and part was in the Arctic Circle. And so I was a youth ambassador, so the trip was totally paid for, which is amazing because that never would have happened otherwise. And so like all these ultra runners who were guiding the trip, well-known ultra runners, they were telling all these stories about their races and like ultra runs they did, and they were just all like really inspiring people too, like always just doing their best to like educate people through their adventures. And I just fell in love with their mindset and the idea of the adventures they went on. And the trip totally changed my life. I came back, quit my college basketball team, and then pretty much just signed up for a 100-mile race.
Wow. So you didn't sort of break yourself in gently.
No. And I think that was like one of the things with the people I met, like they were all like 100-mile plus runners. And so like the thought of 50K was like I didn't even think of it, which now I think, like look back as a coach, I'm like, that is so dumb. But like I just thought of 100 miles. That's all I knew.
Yeah, wow. So the next question I was going to ask you was trying to understand your motivations, as an ultra runner and now as a coach. What made you want to do it and drove you to push forward to get to where you are now?
I think this answer evolves for me, but I think it's still pretty simply that I love adventure and I love being in nature and how being in nature makes me feel. And then I've always just had a love for pushing my body and moving and just being physically active. And then I think something I can embrace now is just choosing to use running and ultra running as a way to strengthen my mind.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's all about the mental as well as the physical. And what's been one of the biggest challenges during your journey? And could you talk us through, what it was and how it might have changed your mindset?
You said the biggest challenge, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll kind of piggyback off the last questions and go into the mindset aspect. And a big challenge I had to learn the hard way is that being an ultra runner does not make you tough. And I'll give an example of this, just of myself personally. Like I used to go into races with a lot of anxiety, and then even after races, if I had a bad race, I could have run 50 or 100 miles and been mad at myself if I didn't perform the way I wanted to. And for a long time, I didn't believe like I had control over those emotions or how I was thinking about those different situations. But over time, and this is really a huge challenge. I feel like talking about it never like expresses how big of a challenge it was. But I realized that I could choose how I wanted to think, and I could strengthen my mindset if I wanted to. And a lot of that was just, I love listening to podcasts. I love reading. And so I pretty much soaked up all the information I could from different sports psychologists and all the books I could read. But then it was also just really having this one thought and that was like always center focus in my life, and just thinking that what is the best version of myself in this situation, and just taking a moment to ask myself those, like that big of a question, like throughout the day, it really makes you stop and think like, hey, you could tell yourself something better right now. And it's also taking a step back and be thinking like, how would I talk to a loved one in the same situation? And just taking that moment is a total game changer for me. Like I still do it all the time because there's always like situations in my life that are hard to handle. But if I can just take that step back, I can just find a better way of thinking.
Yeah, it's so interesting when you can start to draw comparisons between your real actual life, can't you, as well?
Yeah.
And what about mistakes? Obviously, we know that when you line up at the start of a 100-mile race, people say you live like a whole life cycle while you're out there. And it's not like a 5K where you can pretty much say how it's going to go. What have been some of the most common or the biggest mistakes that you've made?
Say one of the big ones is looking at what other people are doing for their training, and then kind of in addition to that is not really fully listening to my body. Like I could kind of lie to myself that I was listening to my body, but then when I really look back, it's like, no, you weren't. And like, that's really like probably one of the most detrimental things I see in the runners I coach is like just not truly listening to your body.
Yeah. So you can make sure that when you're coaching your athletes now, you can say,
yeah, like I'm definitely like on them. Like I'm sure I'm like a super annoying sometimes. Like it's like every day, like, how are you feeling? Like, no, how are you really feeling today? Or like after this run. And then I think people forget that how your mood is on a daily basis is so important for listening to your body. I listen to what a lot of, say, like recovery scientists, or I'll just generalize it into like sports scientists say about recovery. And they're like, there are some things you can look at, but really the biggest thing we found after all these experiences we've done is an athlete's mood. Like if they work out and they're just not happy for days or even weeks at a time, they're probably doing too much.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely the type of person who's like push, like last to the gym, last to go. And so that was really hard for me to learn, like more is not every better, or like doing more than everybody else is not helpful.
No, don't always have to do, train smarter rather than harder.
Yeah, exactly.
So you mentioned that, you were a keen reader and you had that thirst to sort of learn all about the sports psychology particularly. Are there any particular books or documentaries or people that have had a really big impact on you and your running?
So I'm a big nerd, and so like in my little like studio apartment that I live in, we have just a huge, or not a huge bookshelf, but like a whole bookshelf just filled with running like training books. So like we have like the original like first version of like Jack Daniels training book, and then I think it's like Healthy Intelligent Training, which talks about linear training, science of running, like pretty much every running training book you can think of. But I'd honestly say probably one of the most impactful for me that came out recently was Dina Castor's Let Your Mind Run. I fell in love with that book because she does such a beautiful job of showing all these like mental tools and like how to actually apply them to your life. Because I think sometimes that's missing. Like we know these mental tools, but we don't know how to apply them. And she just does such a great job with that. And then just her talking about Coach Joe Vigil. Hopefully I think I'm saying his name right. Joe Vigil. Like, I don't look up to many people, but him as a coach, I really ended up looking up to after that book because he just made her such a good athlete, and part of that was just making her into the like best person she could be as well. And so I just really love the book for that reason.
Oh, thank you. That's really interesting. So I mentioned in the introduction that you quite unusually, really, you've had these experience of running this wealth of distances. Do you have a favorite race distance?
This is another thing that just changes over time as I evolve as a runner. When I first started, I definitely would have said 100 miles, and then I kind of like went backwards and started doing shorter races. And over the past couple of years, I've been doing a lot more like marathon to 50K distances, especially like more like mountain distances. And I definitely fell in love with that. But now thinking like I'd really like to get back into 50-mile races. I still like want to do some like the shorter mountain races, but 50 miles sounds like a nice challenging distance right now.
Yeah. Do you like that distance because you still have that element of speed, in there?
Yeah. I think when I first, part of the reason I didn't run with the team when I was younger, like I always told myself, you're too slow, you're never going to be good enough. But I think challenging myself to run shorter distances challenges that thought, and it makes me just kind of like give a middle finger to that thought that you're too slow. So it's like, I'm going to like see how fast I can be. And like, even if I don't do well, like who cares? At least like I was able to like change how I was thinking and just go for it. And that's like the big thing for me, just not being scared of failing or going for it.
Yeah. If you don't try, you're definitely going to fail, aren't you? If you never try in the first place. Yeah. So what are you going to be focusing on in the 2020 season?
That's a good question. Hopefully 50 milers. As I alluded to before, I definitely made mistakes in the past of not really listening to my body. And so for a long time, I had Achilles issues, and I've already had surgery on my Achilles. And I've seen so many doctors and had so many appointments, but I never like got back to 100%. And finally, like last year, I was like, let's see if I can actually get to 100%. And so I'm still kind of in that process right now. And I like definitely see the light at the end of the tunnel, but I'm not quite ready to sign up for a race, because I know as soon as I sign up for a race, I'm just going to be like mentally in it and be like, and just like kind of put my Achilles aside and start training, which is not what I want to do. So yeah. I'm just going to hold off and make sure like I'm 100% before I actually sign up for that race.
Yeah. And you've been able to turn it into an opportunity to grow your coaching as well. So
exactly, like that's the great thing about like being a coach. Like I love helping people with their goals, and really like I know it's like not 100% my goals, but I kind of like feel like my athletes' goals are mine, and so like I'm thinking about them all the time, and just seeing them succeed is huge. And like I think just being injured too like really challenges you to do other things. I think like being injured is really like a great challenge to strengthen your mindset, because so many runners, you get an injury and you just sulk and be like, poor me. But like if you can figure out how to overcome that, and even like if it's focusing on helping somebody else, like I think that's huge. It just like gets you out of your own head just to like be able to help somebody else.
Yeah. Okay. And long term, do you have any sort of long term overarching goals, things that you'd like to achieve with your running?
I definitely want to be I want to be racing and running until the day I die. So like I think it'd be really cool to like be in my 70s and doing something like hard rock. Like I think that'd be totally badass. So I want to do stuff like that. And then as a coach, like I just want to keep helping people as long as I can. Like it's truly my passion and I love doing it. So if I could just always combine those two things, like I'll be pretty happy.
Yeah, never feel like you're working again.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so how you mentioned now that you're obviously sort of rebuilding back from that injury, and also you're busy with your coaching. So how do you manage to fit everything in? What does a typical day look like for you?
That's a good question, because I think like owning your own business, like you always feel like you have more to do. Like it's never like, oh, I'm actually finished. Like no, it's like you finish like one thing, but then you have like 10 other things to do. So that's definitely a good question. I think what I tell my athletes a lot is if you're really struggling to fit in a run, like schedule a run in like you would at an important meeting. Just like put that much value on the run. For me, I always run in the morning, and that helps me just like I get out of the way, and then I can just focus on everything else. Where if I like wait to run in the afternoon, then I start struggling because like I'm doing all these other things, and so it's hard to like no, like you have to stop and go for a run. So for me, running in the morning helps, and I've been doing that so long where now it's just a habit. I don't even think about it. I think just having that attitude really helps me out as well.
Yeah, I agree with the I'm an old-fashioned paper and pen diary kind of person, and I always used to, when I was in a marathon training block, put my training in like it was an appointment when I was going to do it. Otherwise, it would just keep getting Okay, so if we could talk a little bit more about your training. For example, if you were sort of 3 or 4 weeks out from a let's say a 50k race, what would a typical week of training look like? For you, what sort of volume, what sort of sessions would you incorporate?
I'm taking a second to think, because my honest answer is that it depends. It really depends on how I'm feeling and what all my other training weeks look like. There's been times in the past, like I think before I ran the 50K a couple years ago, where I was like 4 weeks out and I was playing in the summer or playing in the mountains all summer, and I hit 4 weeks and I'm like, my legs feel a little toast right now. And so I started that taper pretty early. Like I was still like running and doing workouts, but I was reducing my mileage and how much vertical gain I was doing. But other times I may not start the taper to 3 weeks out. Other times, like if I feel like if I'm feeling really fresh, like I might even start the taper 2 weeks out. But going back 3 to 4 weeks out, normally I'm putting in my last couple big long runs, and that depends. Sometimes I'll be more mileage focused, but it also might be, even for like a 50K mountain race, it could be reducing the mileage of that long run to like even like 15 to 18 miles, but actually pushing the effort a little bit. Because I think that's the struggle with mountain races, that like you have to be ready to go hard from the start, especially if you're starting off with like a 4 or 5 mile climb. Like you have to be ready to push. So and then also still putting in some tempos. It really depends on the terrain of the race too. Like for a flat 50K, I'd probably be focusing more on tempos, where for a mountain race, again, because like you're not keeping an even effort, I'm probably still staying sharp with just some short interval sessions. And when I say short, it could be like 6 to 8 times 1 minute hill repeats, or even like some 30-second hill repeats, just to keep that power in my legs and keep my heart used to working really hard. But then like the big thing between all of that is just making sure I feel really good starting around like 3 weeks out, and making sure like sleep and recovery and just being happy, like that really matters at that period of time. So just, again, it just really depends on everything.
And what about any sort of non-running related training that you incorporate? Do you incorporate any cross training, any resistance training, that sort of thing?
I did start mountain biking this year, but I don't have a lot of my athletes mountain bike. That's just something I started like to do. But the biggest few things are, I always have my athletes do some sort of core work. And when I say core, it is partly abs, but a lot of it's like hips and glutes and hamstrings. Just so you can, like, your body can hold up and you can maintain good form as long as you can during an ultra. There's just so much breakdown running ultras, and it's so easy to get sloppy, where I really feel like even a little bit of core work goes a long way. And then personally for myself and the athletes who have this equipment or have a little extra time, I do like heavy strength training. I do think there's a lot of research now that's saying doing some really heavy lifts is really beneficial. And I took a course by Jay Dechari over the summer, who wrote the book Running Rewired, and he's a biomechanics expert, and he works with a lot of elite athletes, and he has all of them do like really heavy explosive lifting. And I think the key word there is like explosive. So if I'm doing a deadlift, I'm making sure like I really like pop up. And if I start slowing down, like you just stop, because you're not getting the benefits that you could. And with the strength training, it's really all about recruiting those muscle fibers and getting that explosive power that will carry over into all types of race distances.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And what about any particular things that you do to make sure that you recover well and that you don't get in, how do you make sure that you give your body a chance to recover and repair?
There's probably a couple key things, and number one is for sure sleep. And I come from a family that did not value sleep. We just had a really like hardworking mindset, where just like you just work hard, you suck it up, and like sleep does not equal being a hardworking, gritty Midwesterner. And so like that mindset just, I think it really hurt me for a long, long time. Where now, as an adult, like I started reading all the research on recovery and sleep, and I applied that to myself, and it was really a game changer for me. I just feel so much better all the time. And it's not only just physically, it's also just mentally. it's like mentally being sharp, and also allows me to feel good, which is so important for running and having a good mindset. 20 miles, 40 miles, 80 miles in a run, whatever distance you're doing. So sleep for sure, number one. That's the best way for your body to recover. And then definitely nutrition is important too, especially for ultra runners. You have to make sure you're eating enough and listening to your body. I always tell my athletes, eat nutrient dense food until you're fully satisfied. You know, if you're going to bed hungry, it's not good if you're running a lot. You're definitely not going to be performing at your best. So and oh, actually, I just like read something about this the other day. Like for long runs, you really have to make sure you're eating more if you want to recover fully. Like I think it's easy, like, oh, I should eat like a little bit more after that long run, but no, it's like you really want to replace as many calories as possible to like truly recover as quickly as possible from that long run, and hydrating too. So then also like just doing something fun, like as a way to relax. I think if you really like all into your training and that's really like consuming your life, it's really important to step back and just do something else you enjoy. Could be going out with friends, or it could just be reading a book or watching Netflix, just whatever. Just do something else fun that doesn't involve running.
Yeah, let your brain recover as well as your body.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so thinking about building a training schedule, obviously, you know, it's there's probably no easy answer to this question, but could you just give our audience a little bit of information about how you would go about building a training schedule, either for yourself or for one of your clients?
Yeah, of course. This is what I do all the time. So I think the best place to start is looking at the race you signed up for, finding out all the details about it. What kind of terrain are you running on throughout the race? What's the distance? And even looking at like the grade of the hills, like if there's a lot of like sustained 15% grades or even higher, like you need to note that, because especially like you might be power hiking a lot during a race if there's some really steep climbs. So that's important to note, and be able to include that throughout your training. And then from there, it's like, what are your goals and what do you need to work on? So, you can have your race goals. I definitely think that's important to have like an A, B, and C goal, but then also have your training goals. And for that, you can think about like what you actually need to work on. So for some people, if it's like a flatter ultra, maybe you just need to work on speed. For others, like if it's a lot more of a mountainous ultra, do you need to work on uphills? Do you need to work on getting your legs used to the stress of the downhills and being really efficient with that? So it's definitely looking at what you specifically need to work on. It can even be like being able to eat on the run. Some people really struggle with that. And so you tend to struggle with eating on the run. Like you're going to start practicing fueling during your long runs really early on in training. So those are the two big things I start with. From there, I like to make an outline from the race, and I'll just make a really big outline, and I'll kind of like section off what chunks of time we're going to focus on different areas of training. So at first it might just be building up. Then there'll be some different like speed sections. Sometimes there'll be more lactate threshold, sometimes more intervals, and then getting close to the race, it's normally like all like race really specific stuff, and then just touching up on little things that you can improve upon. So I have that big outline, and I have like all the key workouts, and then I also have the different mileage for the different weeks. But then I know everything will probably change. I just like to have an outline so you can like look and know you're covering all your bases. But then I'm always changing my athletes' plans because things come up, little niggles happen. Like sometimes a mom, like she's got to go to a kid's basketball game that got changed, and so we got to move her long run to the day over. Things are always changing. So, but still, like, have that outline to make sure you're covering your bases. So when you get to the start line, you're like, okay, I did everything I could, and I'm ready for this race.
I bet it's really interesting for you as well, as you expand and you work with more athletes, to see all the different personalities.
Yeah, I love that though. Like it really like keeps me on my toes, and I feel like it keeps my mind sharp, and it's like it really like challenges my mind to like, okay, how should I be thinking about this for this specific person? So I love that challenge.
Yeah, and it's like it's almost like a it becomes about so much more than the running, doesn't it? It's this little window into people in general.
Exactly. I feel like a lot of times I feel so honored to be a coach because I feel like they're letting me in their lives. And I'm like, I know they don't have to be doing this, but they are. And so that's just like a huge privilege to me. And like, it's really nice that I've gotten to coach the same athletes for quite a few years. And so now I just now they're people that mean a lot to me. And so like, I just think that's the coolest thing ever.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. Okay. And thinking about race day, are there any sort of specific things that you do or that you recommend that your athletes do to help execute, the race in the best possible way?
I do like for my athletes to have some sort of plan, especially with fueling. Like there's so many times where it's like, I've told people to like have a fueling plan, and then like the first like hour of the race, they try to like forget about their plan, or they just didn't think about it enough to begin with, and they're like downing as many calories as possible, and then they have a stomach ache. I'm like, oh my gosh, like you can't do that. So it's good to have some sort of plan that you're at least gonna try to stick to for at least part of the race. And then like I know nutrition plans change and you have to be flexible, but have some idea of how many calories and how much fluids you should be getting in per hour. And that's something you should practice during training, so it's not something you really have to think about as much during the race. So that's always huge. And then we will talk about racing strategy a little bit, like what we're going to do in different sections of the course. So sometimes it's just starting off easy, but it's also contain, like if I know somebody's good at downhill, it's like, okay, let's start pushing this downhill at this point in the race and start really trying to race this. And again, it really depends on the athlete. And then, and honestly, this is probably one of the most important things I tell my athletes. And it's just still prepare for the race, but not to worry about the race. Because preparing, like that's actually something that's in your control now, and it still like keeps you in the present moment and will set you up well on race day. Where worrying about the race means you're focusing on something that's not yet in your control and it's not serving you. So that's really huge. Like I tell my athletes, like stay in the present moment and just enjoy the days before the race too. Just don't spend all your time freaking out about what's going to happen, how much it's going to hurt. Just enjoy your current life. And I have to add this one quote. I'm not going to nail the quote exactly because I can't do that. But there's a sports psychologist named Michael Jarvey, and he had this quote about committing, about how you want to feel, how you want to act, basically like who you want to be on race day. And it's all about committing to that. And so I think that's really important too, just to actually take the time to think about like who you want to be during that race and think about what you're going to tell yourself. So when like things start getting tough, like you don't have to think about it, you just know who you are already and what kind of runner you are.
Yeah, that's interesting actually, because the next question I was going to ask you was thinking about the mental side of ultra running and, not just the physical side now. What strategies do you use to get you through a race, and do you, encourage your athletes to use?
I like to throw out like a bunch of different strategies because I think there can be different strategies for different points of a race and based on how you're feeling. Honestly, one of my favorite strategies is trying not to think, because I sometimes think even like positive thinking can still like expend energy because you're trying to like force these thoughts to come in. But sometimes if I just tell myself not to think and just like focus on breathing in and out and just super focused on the scenery right in front of me, like that really just like lets my body do what it can do and perform at its best. So that's my favorite. Like it's definitely something you should do in training though. Like I have my athletes try to do this like really early on, just because that's definitely like, it's hard not to think, but if you can do it, I think it does help a lot during a race, just to be so in the moment where you don't have to have all these thoughts coming in. So that's one of them. Another would be really just talking to yourself like you would a loved one in your situation, just really just knowing that you're your own best cheerleader and you know exactly what to tell yourself in a given situation. So often, like, we look to others for knowledge that we already know ourselves. So really just trust that you know what you need to tell yourself and then do that. So that's another one. I know I have a lot. I'm trying to think of them. Another one that I like to do is sometimes during a race, well, I'll see this picture in my head of myself running and just looking like super good. Like I just have like this great running form. I'm running super well and just like crushing a hill. And I feel like developing that mental image in my head actually makes it so I'm actually doing that, or at least I feel a little bit better that like I see myself in my head and like, oh, you look good right now. And so like it's a little like self-esteem boost. Even like the moment prior, I wasn't like looking very good. Like I feel like that gives me a little boost. Yeah, so just like, I know I have other ones, but that's all I got right now.
Yeah,
So,
they're really good. They're really good. And I like the one about just not thinking about anything apart from just one foot, in front of the
yeah,
in front of the
exactly.
other. But okay. So we talked a little bit about nutrition, and you try and make your athletes sort of know what they're doing before race day. What do you like nutrition wise? When you race, what works for you?
If I can get away with it, which isn't always possible during races, I'll actually do liquid nutrition a lot. I'm sponsored by a company called Unived, and they make these hydration packets that I can just pour in my water bottle, and I'm going to get this wrong. I think it's over 200 calories per like one bottle. And so for me, like if I can get away with it, that just makes it super easy because I'm hydrating and getting in my calories all at once. But that's not always possible because sometimes you have to rely on aid stations, or like it's just a lot to carry. So I also do gels too, but I always kind of like have a plan, like especially if I start mixing like a calorie drink with gels, like I know like I need to have at least a good estimate of how many calories I'm taking in per hour. So I will definitely take gels too. And something that I always do with caffeine is that I'll try to wait until at least the second half of the race to consume caffeine, because for me, it just gives me something to look forward to, and then I just feel like I get an extra boost if I wait for it. Not everybody does that or can benefit from that, but for me, like that's a little extra boost for me in the second half of the race.
I do that with my kids when we're on walks with jelly babies. I'm like, 1 more mile and you can have another one.
That's a great strategy. I like it.
And what about in terms of your kit, your clothing, your gear? Is there anything that you you wouldn't be without, or anything that you always make sure you've got with you on race day?
Really, I just try to I wear rabbit running clothes, and I just wear like really high quality clothes that like aren't gonna chafe, because that's the worst. Like it sounds like such a small problem, but in ultra, like it can really suck to start chafing. So that's really important. And then for ultras, like you normally really need a good hydration vest too that doesn't bounce around too much. So I just wear my ultimate direction pack, and it's something I think it's really important to test out before the race too. Before the race, I normally test out my race clothing and my hydration pack just to make sure I feel good, the fit's right of the vest. Because like the worst is like when you're having like a vest and just bouncing around all over the places you're trying to run downhill. So just test out things like that before the race.
Yeah, nothing new on race day.
Yeah, exactly.
And what about after your race, or even during your training? What process do you take to analyze how it's going, your performance? Are you one of these people that really likes data? How do you do that?
I like data. I guess I'm very mixed. Like I like data, but I also like, again, going back to like how you're feeling. Like I don't think there's anything more important with all the technology out there than how you're feeling. But I will look at heart rate data sometimes and seeing like, even if I'm recovering enough between workouts, to see if I can get my heart rate low enough on easier runs. And then it depends on the race. Like if you're training for like a road race or a flatter race and you're doing road workouts, you could look to see improvements on tempo runs or intervals or long run paces. But the hard thing with like mountain running or trail racing is like you don't always have those paces to look at. And so I think that's where like ultra runners, like you have to be really good at paying attention to how you're feeling. And hopefully like if you start off like doing hill repeats, like early on or just like running uphill, hopefully like by the end of that training period, like you're feeling stronger on the trails and you feel like you can run uphill for hours and be okay. So I think those are important things to look at, just being able to like feel strong by the end of your like big training block.
Yeah, good. Like you say, when it's mountains, you just, oh, I don't know, I was out there for 4 hours. I don't know how fast I was going or how far I went.
Right, exactly. It's in like this tricky element that's hard, but it's definitely doable. It just takes some experimenting.
Yeah. Okay, so as we sort of look to come towards the end of the interview, what do you think are 3 characteristics that help people to be successful in ultra running?
That's a really good question. I think a willingness to learn is definitely one of the biggest things. Like running, even if you're not running ultras, to me it's all about learning, and you're always like taking what you learned and trying to apply it to future races. And so that's huge. And like along those lines, like it's okay to fail. It's gonna happen. Like even if like you don't DNF a race, at some point you're probably gonna feel really bad, and that's okay. You're probably gonna miss goals. That's okay. Like it happens to everybody. Like no one's perfect. You can look at any runner out there and they've all had really terrible races, but it's all being able to learn from those races and move on. Those 2 things. The last thing, just going back, I think just developing a really strong mindset, not only when you're running this, but for your entire life. Like take the time to do that and just really think about all the time, like what does the best version of yourself look like? And that's just going to help you running in just every aspect of your life.
Yes, that's really true. And if you could give yourself, your younger self, one piece of advice relating to running, what would you say?
I just always do something to keep or to cultivate the joy in running, because if you lose that joy, like it's not worth it. So just always cultivate that, and nothing is ever more important than that. Like a race is not more important than that. The goal is not more important than that. Just you have to enjoy running every single day.
Yeah.
I'll take that back. Some runs are going to suck, and that's okay. But overall, like you should enjoy what you're doing, because there's other types of physical activity you could do to be healthy. So, you got to, if you're going to run, enjoy it.
It's okay to have a sucky one every now and then. It makes you appreciate the good ones even more.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. And what advice would you give if there's anybody watching who perhaps wants to make the transition from the road marathon, and that's the furthest they've been, to ultra marathons on trails? What would be your advice to them?
Definitely practice that race day fueling, because that's something you really have to get down. For road runners, you probably have a lot of speed. So it's really looking at like the ultras you signed up for and adding in some specific training. Like if it's going to be technical, you have to practice on technical terrain. Not all the time, but enough to like feel like, okay, I got this, I'm good at this. And it's not, I think this is probably a really important thing for road runners. You might not actually be running more. You might just be adjusting how your mileage is. So if you're like a marathon road runner and your longest long run is, if you're running, let's say it's just like 60 miles a week, you still might be running 60 miles a week for training for ultras. You might just be putting your mileage in different places. So that long run might be longer, but then the day before might be a really short run, where for road marathon training, maybe it still would have been like a medium regular run where this time. So it's just about changing your mileage up, not actually running more.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. Okay. And as a coach, what would you say are the kind of key principles and the key pieces of advice that you would give to any of your athletes, regardless of their experience or level? I think we've kind of touched on a few of the things that you would probably say, but I
wrote some things down for this one because I didn't want to forget. I think it's kind of just summarizing what I said. Always keep the joy alive. A big thing for ultra running, I think, is controlling what's controllable and just kind of like having your good mindset for what's out of your control. But so easy to focus on everything that's not in our control, but there's always stuff that in our control that we can work on. There's always something good to focus on, no matter how bad things are going. So it's really like choosing where you put your focus is extremely, extremely important. Then listen to your body. I know I said that 100 times, but that's so important for ultra running and training. And then the last thing is just like really having an understanding of the type of person you want to be, and just cultivating that best version of yourself. And again, just like taking the time to actually do that. It's so easy in this world, just go through the motions and just do the same thing every day without actually thinking about what we're doing or why we're thinking a certain way. But if you can really step back and ask yourself some hard questions and like do the mental training work, like your running's you'll be running the best that you possibly can, but then your whole life is gonna be better. So really like the big things for me.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's really interesting. Thank you very much. I think that just about brings us to the end. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Sandi. It's been really interesting. And we'll put all of the links below the interview for everyone to be able to follow you and check you out online. So thank you everyone for watching, and thank you, Sandi, for joining us.